for people that we call moderate Muslims, it's not enough to say that Islam, as a political theology, has nothing to do with ISIS. So you may be a good peace-loving Muslim who's disgusted by what happened in Paris and what is happening across the world in the name of Islam, but the stance to take is not to deny that these things are not connected to the doctrine of Islam. The stance to take is to say, let's acknowledge that this is part of our Islamic doctrine and tradition. We share this with these terrible people. But the answer to that is to reform it.
But if the majority are moderate, why do you need to reform it?
You have to make a distinction between Islam as a doctrine with a political dimension, that is what people who have established ISIS use, and adherents, the Muslims, 1.6 billion people in the world who identify themselves as Muslim. So for them to protect their faith from the extremists and the violent extremists and even the non-violent extremists who peddle a message of violence and jihad, they have to reform the faith. They have to say, here are things about our faith that are outdated that we don't want to follow.
What makes you think that the kinds of men who cut people's heads off or who detonate suicide vests on themselves are interested in a theological discussion with you?
They are interested in a theological discussion within, not only with me. 10 years ago, I thought I was just a lone voice, but now I see an emerging group of people everywhere who are Muslim, who are saying, listen, we can't deny this any longer. We are pitting ourselves in a world war against the rest of the world. We have to reform our religion. And I think in the long run, that is the only way to end violent Islamic extremism.
I'm very curious, though, as to why you think this would work. I mean, you used to argue that Islam needed to be defeated, that, that this idea of reform could only come after the religion had been put down.
What I have changed my position on what I see emerging are large groups of people. The demonstrations in Egypt made it very clear that there were thousands of Muslims who wanted to call themselves Muslim and identify as Muslim, but did not want Sharia law. We've seen this in Tunisia, but we're also seeing it increasingly in Europe and in the United States. The key thing to do is to organize all of these people who, A, identify as Muslim, and B, want to throw out the key aspects within the Quran and Prophet's example, jihad, and this really disgusting attachment to life after death. That's what makes Islam a death cult. If you want to throw that out, then you have to organize around that principle. It is possible. It is a hard way, but it is possible. And these are the people we need to invest in, not the Saudis and the Qataris and the Muslim Brotherhood and all the other organized Salafis that want to convince us that Islam unreformed is a religion of peace. They are lying to us, and they are the conveyor belts for the violent extremists.
When you say you still want to defeat Islam, what do you mean? Do you mean violently?
I mean the doctrine of jihad. The doctrine of jihad needs to be repudiated in the mosque and at school. That needs to be defeated as an idea, the way we defeated National Socialism as an idea. We need to defeat the idea that life after death is preferable to life before death. That idea needs to be defeated.
But do you not see why 1 billion people who are peaceful around the world, who believe they have nothing in common with Islamic State, who they regard as extremists, who believe in terrible things that they do not accept, would just find what you're saying not just absurd, but really offensive?
You have to understand that most of the victims of Islamic extremists are other Muslims. And they're victims in several ways.
Exactly.
But one of them, and I think the most important one is taking young children, boys and girls, and filling their heads, using the Quran and the example of the Prophet Muhammad, filling their heads with hatred for this life, filling their heads with the idea of jihad, with the idea of Sharia. That is what we need. I mean, I'm an ex-Muslim, but there are fellow Muslims, again, who are seeing this happen within their own communities. And that is exactly what we need to face. And this time, I'm happy to say, even though, unfortunately, we are seeing Paris and other disgusting terrorist attacks. But I'm happy to say this time, as opposed to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that there are more and more Muslims who are connecting the dots in this way. These reformists, these dissenters, these heretics, They are the ones we need to see, to acknowledge, to organize, and to support.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali, thank you very much.